In the sprawling farmlands of western Montana, where the Bitterroot Mountains cast long shadows across golden wheat fields, Mason Anderson's weathered farmhouse stands as a testament to 3 generations of agricultural persistence. To passing travelers on the dusty county road, it appears like any other family farm, a rustic 2-story home with a wraparound porch surrounded by fields of wheat and corn that stretch toward the distant mountains. But what these travelers don't notice is Shadow, Mason's black and tan German shepherd, whose alert eyes miss nothing that moves across their 100 acres. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the early autumn of 2024, as combines harvest the last crops before winter, Mason's farm holds a secret that local troublemakers are about to discover the hard way. To the casual observer, Shadow seems like any other farm dog, loyal, protective, always at Mason's side as he works the land. They see the dog's gentle interaction with Mason's young daughter Emma, how he herds the chickens with careful precision, how he patrols the property's perimeter with what appears to be simple canine dedication. What they don't know, what the Taylor brothers and their gang of land-grabbing thugs are about to learn, is that Shadow isn't just any farm dog. Before Mason adopted him from a specialized training program, Shadow served 3 tours in Afghanistan as part of an elite canine unit. His seeming routine patrols of the farm's perimeter actually follow military-grade tactical patterns. Those gentle games with Emma often involve complex training exercises disguised as play. Every apparently casual circuit of the property reinforces a sophisticated security network that Mason and Shadow have spent years perfecting. Through the farm's kitchen window, Mason watches Shadow guide the chickens into their coop as sunset approaches. His calloused hands wrap around a coffee mug, steam rising in the crisp mountain air that seeps through the window frame. 20 years of farming these acres have taught him to read the subtle signs of changing seasons, of approaching storms, of threats to his livelihood. But it's Shadow who first alerts him to something different in the air tonight. The dog's ears prick forward, his posture shifting from casual to alert in a way that Mason has learned to read as clearly as storm clouds. On the horizon, through the window, he watches Shadow's head turn toward the northern fence line, where the property borders unclaimed Forest Service land. The dog's body language speaks volumes to those who know how to read it. Not immediate danger, but something that requires attention. "What is it, boy?" Mason asks quietly, though he suspects he knows. The Taylor brothers have been pushing hard lately, buying up farms across the valley, using methods that skirt the edge of legality. 3 families have sold in the past month alone, all under circumstances that left the community whispering about threats and mysterious accidents. Shadow's response is subtle. A slight shift in posture, a particular tilt of his head that Mason recognizes from their years together. It's a signal they developed during long nights training, one that means unauthorized movement along the property line. Mason sets down his coffee, his mind already running through the security measures they've established throughout the farm. To most, they look like simple agricultural adaptations: strategic fence lines, carefully positioned outbuildings, lighting arrays that seem designed for late-night farming operations. "Emma," he calls softly to his daughter, who's reading on the living room couch. "Time for your sleepover at Aunt Sarah's." The 10-year-old looks up, catching something in her father's tone that tells her this isn't a casual suggestion. She's grown up understanding certain protocols, though they're always presented as simple farm safety measures. Through the window, Mason spots dust rising from the county road. 3 vehicles moving slower than typical farm traffic. Their approach, suggesting careful observation rather than casual passage. Shadow has already moved to his secondary observation position, his dark coat blending with the shadows of the equipment barn in a way that seems casual but provides perfect coverage. Of the main approach, as Emma heads upstairs to pack her overnight bag, Mason begins his own preparations. His movements are unhurried, practiced, just a farmer going about his evening routine. He checks the livestock, secures equipment, moves vehicles into their night positions. But each action serves a specific purpose in a security framework that he and Shadow have refined through countless training sessions. The dust from the approaching vehicles grows closer. Shadow maintains his position, his posture, communicating. Continuous updates about the visitor's approach. Mason notes how the dog's ears track movement beyond the visible road, suggesting more vehicles approaching from other angles. The Taylor brothers are many things, but subtle isn't one of them. Through carefully positioned mirrors, agricultural equipment to most observers, Mason tracks the vehicle's approach. 2 pickup trucks and an SUV, all with recent modifications, suggesting serious investment. Behind them, more dust clouds approach from the Western Access Road. The Taylor brothers aren't just making a social call, they're bringing numbers that suggest they're tired of hearing no to their land acquisition. Offers, Emma appears on the porch, overnight bag in hand. Mason guides her to his old farm truck, maintaining casual movements while his mind calculates angles, positions, contingencies. This isn't the first time they've faced pressure, though the scale of the Taylor brothers' approach suggests escalation. Shadow follows at a careful distance, his movement patterns seemingly random, but actually providing perfect coverage of potential blind spots. "Remember what we practiced, Princess," Mason says quietly as he starts the truck. Emma nods, her young face showing understanding beyond her years. She's grown up knowing certain rules, which roads to take in different situations, which neighbors to trust, how to recognize Shadow's various warning signals. As Mason's truck disappears down the back road toward his sister's house, Shadow takes up his primary defensive position. The dog's military training shows in subtle ways how he uses terrain for cover, how he maintains awareness of multiple approaches, how he positions himself to observe without being observed. To the approaching threats, he'll appear to be simply a farm dog watching their arrival. They don't realize they're being assessed by a veteran of countless combat operations. The lead vehicle stops at the farm's main gate. Through positioned mirrors, Mason watches for men exit, led by Curtis Taylor himself, his expensive boots incongruous with his attempts to project a simple local businessman image. Behind him, his brothers Derek and Wayne emerge from the second vehicle, followed by men whose bearing suggests hired muscle rather than local farmers. Shadow remains perfectly still, gathering intelligence about their numbers, weapons, positions. His training allows him to note crucial details, how they carry themselves, where they focus their attention, their level of professional experience. To them, he's invisible in the growing dusk, just another shadow among farm equipment. They don't realize they're being evaluated by an expert in tactical assessment. The sun dips behind the Bitterroot Mountains as Curtis Taylor's group approaches the farmhouse. Mason steps onto his porch, maintaining the image of a simple farmer greeting unexpected visitors. Shadow seems to doze near the equipment barn, though his position has been carefully chosen to cover multiple approach angles while appearing completely casual. "Evening, Mason," Curtis calls out, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggests this isn't a social visit. "Thought it was time we had another chat about your property's future." What Curtis doesn't realize, what none of them understand, is that this apparent simple farm, with its normal-looking dog, has been carefully prepared for exactly this type of situation. The real question isn't whether Mason will sell his farm. The real question is whether the Taylor brothers will realize they're walking into a carefully prepared trap before it's too late. Curtis Taylor's men begin spreading out across Mason's front yard, their boots crushing the early autumn frost beneath them. To untrained eyes, their movement might appear casual, but Shadow's ears track each position shift with military precision. The dog's enhanced hearing picks up whispered communications, the subtle clicks of weapons being checked, the soft crackle of concealed radio units. Developments coming to this valley whether you like it or not, Curtis continues, gesturing expansively at the surrounding farmland. We've got investors ready to break ground on a luxury resort complex. Golf courses, ski lodges, high-end residential units. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Your property's the last piece we need to complete the package. Mason notes how Derek Taylor keeps glancing toward the equipment barn, where Shadow maintains his seemingly relaxed position. The youngest Taylor brother's hand rests too close to his concealed weapon, his stance suggesting combat training, probably private military contractors, based on how he carries himself. These aren't just local thugs, they've brought professional muscle. Through the farm's network of carefully positioned mirrors, Mason spots movement along the northern fence line, more men emerging from vehicles hidden in the tree cover, carrying equipment that suggests they're prepared for more than simple intimidation. Shadow's left ear twitches twice, their signal for aerial surveillance. Somewhere above the cloud cover, Mason knows a drone is mapping his property. Could be worth your while to be reasonable. Wayne Taylor speaks up, pulling Mason's attention back to the immediate threat. Other folks who've sold to us, they're living comfortably now. New homes in better locations, college funds for their kids. His tone shifts slightly. Though some who weren't reasonable, well, farming's a dangerous business. Lots of things. It can go wrong. As if on cue, the sound of breaking glass carries from the back of the farmhouse. Mason doesn't react, though he notes how Curtis Taylor's smile widens slightly. Through their surveillance network, he watches two men in dark clothing attempt to breach his back door, thinking they're being stealthy. They don't realize that Shadow's military training included extensive experience with countering covert infiltration. Might want to check on that, Curtis suggests, his voice carrying rehearsed concern. Probably just the wind. But you never know what kind of troublemakers might be around these days. Mason maintains his calm demeanor, though his mind calculates angles and positions. Shadow's training included specific protocols for handling multiple threat vectors. The dog's current position isn't just about observing, it's the perfect starting point for implementing certain countermeasures they've prepared. Strange weather we've been having, Mason responds mildly, like that mysterious fire at Johnson Place last week, or those equipment failures at the Williams farm. He meets Curtis's gaze steadily, almost like someone's trying to change the valley's weather patterns. Curtis's smile falters slightly. He hadn't expected Mason to be so well informed about recent events. Behind him, Derek shifts position, revealing more of his tactical training. These men are used to simple intimidation working. They don't realize they're dealing with someone who spent years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A new sound carries across the farm. The distinct whine of high-end power tools coming from the direction of Mason's main storage silo. More of Taylor's men, probably thinking they're being clever by threatening his grain supply. Shadow's right. Ear flicks forward, then back, their signal indicating the intruders have reached the first set of prepared positions. Quite the operation you're running here, Mason observes casually, noting how Curtis's men have established coverage of all obvious escape routes. It takes a lot of coordination to handle so many simultaneous activities. Through their surveillance network, he tracks multiple teams moving into position around his property. Two men approached from the south, using his cornfield for cover. Three more working their way through the equipment yard, probably planning to disable his vehicles. The team at the silo now discovering that certain access panels aren't as vulnerable as they appeared. Just business, Curtis responds, though his expression suggests he's starting to realize this confrontation isn't following his usual script. Progress comes at a price. Smart folks know when to take a good offer. Mason's attention catches on a subtle signal from Shadow. A specific way the dog shifts his weight that indicates aerial surveillance has increased. More drones, probably carrying infrared cameras to map his property's heat signatures. They're looking for hidden defensive positions, not realizing that he and Shadow have spent years preparing for exactly this type of technological surveillance. Interesting definition of progress, Mason comments, buying time as he tracks multiple developing situations through their surveillance network. The team at his back door is about to discover certain modifications to his security systems. The group by the silo will soon learn why tampering with specific access panels isn't wise. Most folks might call it something else. Curtis steps closer, abandoning pretense. Look, Mason, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but if you think being difficult will help, well, he gestures toward the gathering darkness. We've got all night to discuss terms, and we've got plenty of people ready to help explain things. Shadow's posture shifts slightly. Another practiced signal. The dog's enhanced senses have detected something approaching from the eastern perimeter, something that suggests the Taylor brothers have brought more than just human assets to this confrontation. Mason accesses that information while maintaining his role as a simple farmer facing intimidation. Through positioned observation points, he notes how Taylor's men have established what they think is tactical superiority. Their positions suggest military training, probably expensive contractors hired to handle reluctant sellers, but their confidence is based on dealing with ordinary farmers. They haven't considered what they're really facing. Might want to check your radio, Mason suggests casually. Seems like your team at the silo's having some trouble. Curtis's hand moves to his concealed earpiece, his expression darkening as he realizes communications with certain teams have gone silent. Behind him, Derek and Wayne exchange glances that suggest this isn't following their usual operation pattern. They're used to simple intimidation working, used to farmers folding under pressure, used to their superior numbers and tactical training, guaranteeing success. Shadow's ears track new movement, vehicles approaching from the county road. But these engines carry different signatures from the Taylor brothers' trucks. The dog's body language communicates specific details to Mason. Law enforcement vehicles approaching with lights off, probably responding to certain automated alerts. Their security system had triggered. Getting crowded out here, Mason observes, noting how Curtis keeps checking his earpiece, trying to raise teams that are no longer responding. Might want to consider your position carefully. Through their surveillance network, he watches the Taylor brothers' operation begin to show cracks. The team at the silo has gone completely silent. The backdoor group hasn't reported in. The men in the equipment yard are discovering that certain vehicles aren't as vulnerable as they appeared, and somewhere above, their drone surveillance is about to encounter countermeasures that Mason and Shadow have carefully prepared. Last chance, Curtis snarls, his practiced businessman facade cracking. Sign the papers now, or we do this the hard way. Mason allows himself a small smile, one that makes Curtis step back slightly. Through position mirrors, he watches Shadow adjust his position with military precision. The dog's combat training is about to become very relevant, though the Taylor brothers don't realize it yet. Funny thing about chances, Mason responds quietly. They work both ways. Shadow's ears prick forward, their signal that everything is in position. The trap they've spent years preparing is ready for spring. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with a simple farmer and his dog. They're about to learn just how wrong they were. A sudden gust of wind carries the scent of diesel fuel from the direction of the equipment yard. Mason's enhanced surveillance network shows him Taylor's men discovering that disabling farm vehicles isn't as simple as they expected. Years of working with Shadow's military training had taught Mason a lot about securing critical assets. Each piece of equipment contains subtle surprises for anyone attempting unauthorized access. "You're investors," Mason comments casually, watching Curtis struggle with his failing communications. "Would that be the same group behind the resort development up in Clearwater County, the one that mysteriously burned down last spring?" He notes how Derek Taylor's expression shifts slightly. "Or maybe the hotel project over in Riverside that got shut down for environmental violations." Curtis's facade of control cracks further. He hadn't expected this simple farmer to know about operations. 2 counties over. Behind him, Wayne pulls out a phone, probably trying to contact backup teams that are already encountering prepared obstacles throughout the property. Through their surveillance system, Mason tracks multiple situations developing simultaneously. The team at the silo has discovered that certain access panels are electronically monitored. The men in his cornfield are finding that navigating crop rows in the dark is more challenging than expected, especially with Shadow's carefully planned route modifications. And the group attempting to breach his back door has gone completely silent. "Lots of interesting stories going around the valley lately," Mason continues, his calm tone masking precise tactical awareness. "About shell companies, money laundering, foreign investors who never seem to show their faces." He watches Curtis's reaction carefully. Federal authorities seem pretty interested in those stories. A new sound carries across the darkening farm, the distinctive whine of motor trouble from the tree line where Taylor's hidden vehicles wait. Shadow's ears twitch in a pattern that tells Mason someone's discovering the effects of certain chemical additives they'd carefully distributed along likely approach routes. Additives that play havoc with modern fuel injection systems. "You've got no idea what you're dealing with," Curtis snarls, his businessman persona completely gone. "No idea who you're messing with." Mason allows himself another small smile. "Actually," he responds quietly, "I think you've got that backward." Through their surveillance network, he watches Taylor's operation continue to unravel. The drone coverage above is starting to encounter atmospheric anomalies that Mason and Shadow spent months preparing. Electronic interference patterns, carefully calculated to disrupt certain surveillance frequencies. A subtle vibration travels through the ground, something only Shadow's enhanced senses could detect. Right on schedule, Mason thinks. Certain underground systems they'd installed are activating, though Taylor's men won't understand their purpose until it's too late. "Starting to rain," Mason observes mildly, though no drops have fallen yet. Curtis glances up at the cloudy sky, not realizing the significance of the comment. But Shadow understands. It's a signal phrase they developed during training. The T. Dog's muscles tense imperceptibly, ready to implement specific protocols. Through position mirrors, Mason watches more of Taylor's operation fall apart. The team in the equipment yard has gone silent. The men in the cornfield aren't responding. To radio calls, the silo group hasn't checked in for over 10 minutes. And somewhere above, their drone surveillance is about to encounter the full effect of Mason's atmospheric countermeasures. "Last warning," Curtis declares, trying to reassert control over a situation that's slipping away from him. "Sign now, or we do this the hard way." Shadow's ears track new movement, more vehicles approaching, but these carry the distinct sound signatures of heavy equipment. Mason knows those engines. Local farmers don't take kindly to outside threats, and certain alerts he'd prepared have been quietly triggering throughout the valley. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" Mason asks conversationally, as multiple situations reach critical points throughout his property. "Thinking you were just dealing with a farmer and his dog." Shadow rises silently, his military training evident in every movement. Around the farm, prepared positions that took years to establish are about to become very relevant. The Taylor. Brothers thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to discover just how thoroughly they've been outmaneuvered. The first drops of rain begin to fall as Shadow moves with fluid precision toward the equipment barn. His movement draws the attention of Derek Taylor's security team exactly as planned. To them, it looks like a dog seeking shelter from the coming storm. They don't realize he's implementing specific tactical protocols developed through years of military operations. "Might want to call your men at the north fence," Mason suggests calmly, watching Curtis struggle with his failing communications. "Strange things happen up there when the weather turns." His casual tone masks precise tactical awareness as he monitors multiple situations through their surveillance network. The rain intensifies, carrying with it the distinct scent of wet soil and something else, something that shadows enhanced. Senses identify immediately the acrid smell of specialized equipment failing, of high-end electronics encountering carefully prepared countermeasures. Above them, the drone coverage is deteriorating rapidly as Mason's atmospheric modifications take full effect. "Check the western approach," Curtis barks into his radio, frustration evident as more teams go silent. Through positioned observation points, Mason watches Taylor's operation encounter prepared obstacles throughout the property. The rain isn't just water. It carries specific chemical compounds designed to interfere with certain types of equipment. Shadow's movement has drawn 3 of Taylor's men toward the equipment barn. Their approach is professional, suggesting military or law enforcement background, but their training assumes they're dealing with normal threats. They haven't considered what a combat-trained military dog might have prepared for them. "Interesting choice of equipment your men are carrying," Mason observes, noting the specialized gear visible beneath their civilian clothing. Not the kind of tools most land developers use, more like what certain private military contractors favor. He watches Curtis's expression shift. The same contractors who've been showing up at other farms across 3 counties. A sudden burst of static from Wayne Taylor's radio suggests another team has encountered problems. Through their surveillance network, Mason tracks multiple developments. The men at the silo discover that certain access points are more than they appear. The team in the cornfield finds that Shadow's modified maze design serves specific tactical purposes. The group by the vehicles learning about Mason's fuel system innovations. "Getting expensive for you, isn't it?" Mason continues, his voice carrying just enough knowledge to make Curtis reassess his position. "Professional contractors, high-end surveillance gear, specialized equipment, all to pressure some simple farmers." He glances meaningfully at the tree line where more of Taylor's men wait. "Your investors must be getting impatient." Shadow's ears track new movement from multiple directions. Local farmers approached with heavy equipment, their engines mixing with the sound of the rain. But there's something else. Vehicle signatures that the dog's military training identifies as law enforcement, moving into carefully prepared positions around the property. Through the increasing rain, Mason watches Taylor's operation continue to degrade. Their communication network encountered precisely calculated interference. Their tactical positions were compromised by terrain features that looked natural but served specific purposes. Their technological advantages are neutralized by years of careful preparation. "Your drone coverage is pretty sophisticated," Mason notes, watching Curtis check his phone for updates that aren't coming. "Military-grade systems, from what I can see. Expensive toys for a simple land development operation." He pauses deliberately. Wonder what the FAA would think about unauthorized surveillance flights over private property. A sharp crack from the direction of the silo indicates Taylor's men discovering one of Shadow's special security measures. The dog's ears twitch in a pattern that tells Mason exactly which system they've encountered. Years of working with military canine units had taught him a lot about integrating canine capabilities into property defense. "Your biggest problem," Mason continues, as multiple situations reach critical points throughout his property, "is assuming you knew what you were dealing with, thinking superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed success." Through their surveillance network, he watches Taylor's men encounter prepared positions they never suspected. But you never asked the right questions. Shadow's posture shifts slightly, another signal in their elaborate communication system. The dog's enhanced senses have detected something approaching from the eastern perimeter, something that suggests the Taylor brothers' operation is larger than they've revealed. Mason processes this intelligence while maintaining his role as a simple farmer facing intimidation, like why a combat-trained military dog would end up on a Montana farm, Mason suggests, watching realization begin to dawn in Curtis Taylor's eyes, or why a farmer would spend years modifying his property in very specific ways. Through position mirrors, he tracks multiple teams encountering prepared obstacles throughout his land. Or maybe why certain federal agencies would be interested in land deals in this particular valley. The rain continues to fall, but it's not behaving quite normally. Taylor's men are starting to notice how it affects their equipment, how it seems to follow patterns that serve tactical purposes. Shadow's military training included extensive experience with environmental modification as a strategic tool. Your operation is impressive, Mason acknowledges, noting how Curtis keeps checking his failing communications. Professional contractors, sophisticated surveillance, coordinated teams. Must have cost a fortune to set up. He allows himself a small smile. Shame it's all being dismantled by a farmer and his dog. Through their surveillance network, he watches Taylor's carefully planned operation continue to unravel. Teams going, silent in precise sequence, equipment failing in specific patterns, tactical positions becoming compromised exactly as designed. Years of preparation paid off in ways the Taylor brothers never anticipated. Getting crowded out there, Mason observes, as more local farmers arrive with heavy equipment. Through the rain, Shadow's enhanced hearing picks up the distinct sound of federal vehicles moving into position. Might want to consider your options carefully. Curtis Taylor's facade of control has completely cracked. His professional contractors are encountering situations their training never covered. His sophisticated equipment is failing in ways tech support can't explain. His tactical superiority has been systematically dismantled by opponents he never properly assessed. You think this changes anything? Curtis snarls, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. You think your little Drix will stop what's coming. We've got backing you can't imagine, connections that reach higher than you know. Shadow's ears prick forward, their signal that everything is proceeding according to plan. The trap they've spent years preparing is now fully armed. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with a simple farmer and his pet. They're about to discover exactly what a combat-trained military dog and his tactically prepared partner can accomplish. Connections are funny things, Mason responds quietly, as multiple situations reach critical mass throughout his property. They work both ways, and some reach higher than others. Through their surveillance network, he watches federal agents begin moving in, their approach coordinated with his prepared defenses. Want to guess which federal agencies are most interested in land fraud schemes involving foreign money laundering? The fool. Rain falls harder, carrying compounds that continue to degrade Taylor's sophisticated equipment. Shadow's military training included specific protocols for handling multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Every drop of rain, every piece of failing equipment, every compromised tactical position serves a precise purpose in their carefully prepared response. Last chance, Mason offers, as years of preparation come to fruition around them. Though, not the kind of chance you're used to offering. Through position mirrors, he watches Taylor's operation face total collapse. Sometimes the trap isn't about what you can see. Sometimes it's about what you never thought to look for. Shadow rises silently, his combat training evident in every movement. Around the farm, prepared positions that took years to establish are about to become devastatingly relevant. The Taylor brothers thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some opponents are best left undisturbed. A series of sharp cracks from the direction of the equipment yard draws everyone's attention. Through the rain, Mason watches Taylor's men discovering another layer of their security system. The seemingly simple farm machinery houses sophisticated countermeasures, each piece positioned to serve multiple tactical purposes. Those thermal imaging devices your men are carrying? Mason notes casually, watching Derek Taylor's hand move toward his own equipment. Military prototype models, aren't they? Not exactly standard issue. Not even available on the civilian market. He pauses, deliberately. Interesting how they're failing in this rain. Shadow's ears track multiple sound signatures approaching from the north. The dog's enhanced training allows him to distinguish between different types of vehicles. Local farmers in heavy equipment, federal agents in tactical vehicles, and something else. Something that suggests the Taylor brothers have brought backup they haven't revealed yet. Your investors, Mason continues, monitoring Curtis's increasingly agitated reactions. They wouldn't happen to be connected to certain international banking. Concerns currently under federal investigation. The ones moving money through shell companies in 3 different countries. Through their surveillance network, he watches more of Taylor's operation encounter prepared obstacles. Amazing what patterns emerge when you know where to look. The rain intensifies, carrying more of Mason's specialized compounds. Years of working with Shadow's military experience had taught him about chemical markers, about how certain substances could be used to track movement patterns across terrain. Now those lessons are paying off as Taylor's men leave invisible trails throughout the property. Getting hard to maintain formation, Wayne Taylor mutters, trying to coordinate with teams that are no longer responding. Through positioned mirrors, Mason watches their tactical positions deteriorate. The rain isn't just degrading their equipment, it's forcing them to move in specific patterns, herding them toward prepared positions they don't yet realize exist. Shadows. Posture shifts again, another signal in their complex communication system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with coordinated tactical response. Each movement, each position shift serves multiple purposes in their carefully prepared defense. Interesting thing about military dogs, Mason observes, noting how Curtis keeps glancing nervously at Shadow. They don't just learn combat tactics, they learn to read patterns, to anticipate threats, to coordinate responses across multiple vectors. He allows himself another small smile. Some even learn to train others. Through the increasingly heavy rain, new sounds emerge. Local farm dogs begin to respond to specific signal patterns that Shadow has spent years teaching them. Not just random barking, but coordinated communication that serves tactical purposes. The Taylor brothers thought they were facing one trained dog. They're about to discover they're dealing with an entire coordinated canine response network. You're operational. Security had some holes, Mason continues, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. Like those weekly hunting trips your men took in the national forest, the ones that always coincided with property damage at farms that wouldn't sell. He pauses meaningfully. Funny how certain federal agencies take interest in patterns like that. Shadow's ears track more movement. Tactical teams moving into final positions throughout the property. But the dog's enhanced senses detect something else, something that suggests the Taylor brothers' desperation is about to make them even more dangerous. The rain continues to fall, each drop serving specific purposes in their defense plan. Mason's surveillance network shows Taylor's men encountering more prepared positions, more coordinated responses, more evidence that they've severely underestimated their opposition. Last chance to reconsider your position, Mason offers, as multiple situations reach critical points across his property. Though I should warn you, federal agents tend to be less patient than farmers. Through careful observation points, he watches the Taylor brothers' operation face complete tactical failure. Their sophisticated equipment rendered useless, their professional contractors outmaneuvered, their carefully planned operations systematically dismantled by opponents they never properly evaluated. Shadow rises to full alert, his combat training evident in every muscle. Around the farm, years of preparation are about to pay off in ways the Taylor brothers never anticipated. They thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn what happens when you underestimate a military dog and his partner who've spent years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. The distinctive crack of a rifle shot splits the rainy darkness, echoing across Mason's property. Through their surveillance network, he watches Curtis Taylor's expression shift from frustration to savage satisfaction. The shot came from the tree line, where their hidden backup waits, a message meant to demonstrate escalating threats. But Shadow's reaction isn't what they expect. Instead of startling at the sound, the dog's posture shifts into a specific combat stance. His military training included extensive experience with sniper operations, both evading and countering them. Each positioning of his body now serves tactical purposes that Taylor's men don't yet comprehend. That would be Mr. Chen's specialty work, wouldn't it? Mason asks calmly, noting how Curtis flinches at the name. Your Ukrainian friend with an interesting military background, the one whose visa status might interest certain federal agencies. Through positioned mirrors, he tracks multiple responses to the shot. Local farmers moving their equipment into protective formations, federal agents adjusting their approach vectors. Shadow's network of trained dogs implementing specific response protocols. Wayne Taylor's radio crackles with static-filled urgency. Sir, we've lost contact with the sniper team. Something's wrong with their night vision equipment. All their electronics are failing. His voice carries poorly masked concern. And there's something out there in the trees with them. Shadow's ears track specific movement patterns that tell Mason exactly what's happening in the darkness. Months of training local farm dogs in military-grade tactical responses are paying off. The Taylor brothers thought their sniper team was the hunter. They're about to discover they've become the prey. Interesting choice, bringing Mr. Chen into this, Mason continues, watching Curtis struggle to maintain control of his operation. Ex-military sniper turned private contractor, specialty in long-range agricultural accidents. Been operating across 3 states, hasn't he? He pauses deliberately, until his equipment started experiencing mysterious failures recently. Through the rain-soaked darkness, new sounds emerge. The distinctive crunch of someone running through wet undergrowth, their movement panicked rather than tactical. Shadow's ears identify multiple retreating signatures, the sniper team discovering that their position has been thoroughly compromised. Fall. Back to secondary positions, Curtis orders into his radio, trying to reorganize his failing operation. But the rain continues to fall, carrying Mason's specialized compounds. Each droplet marks movement patterns, creating trackable trails that Shadow's enhanced senses can follow with military precision. A sudden floodlight burst from the equipment barn illuminates the yard, revealing Taylor's men in exposed positions. The light isn't random. It's part of a carefully planned system designed to create tactical advantages. Before they can react, the light cuts out, leaving them night-blind, just as Shadow's network of trained dogs begins implementing their next phase of response. Your professional contractors, Mason observes, noting how Derek Taylor's tactical team bunches together defensively. They're trained for urban operations, aren't they? Not much experience with rural terrain, especially not terrain that's been specifically modified for tactical purposes. Through their surveillance network, he watches Taylor's operation continue to degrade, their night vision equipment rendered useless by specialized countermeasures. Their communication systems encounter precisely calculated interference. Their tactical positions are compromised by terrain features that serve multiple defensive purposes. Shadow's posture shifts again, Another signal in their elaborate system. The dog's enhanced senses have detected something approaching from the western perimeter, something that suggests the Taylor brothers are about to attempt a desperate escalation. "Sir," Wayne's voice carries barely controlled panic. "The backup team from Eagle Ridge isn't responding. Their vehicles won't start. And there's something moving out there. Multiple things. Coordinated movement patterns we can't track." Mason allows himself a small smile, watching Curtis process this new information. Shadow's military training included specific protocols for coordinating multiple canine units in tactical operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated in ways the Taylor brothers never anticipated. Getting expensive for you, isn't it? Mason comments, noting how Curtis keeps checking his phone for updates that aren't coming. Professional contractors failing, expensive equipment malfunctioning, tactical positions compromised. He glances meaningfully at the tree line where more chaos unfolds. Your investors must be getting concerned about the return on their investment. A new sound carries through the rain, the distinctive whine of specialized equipment failing catastrophically. Through positioned observation points, Mason watches Taylor's remaining tactical teams encounter prepared obstacles throughout his property. Each failure, each compromised position, each degraded system serves specific purposes in their defense. Plan. The thermal imaging completely down, Derek reports, his professional demeanor cracking. Radio communication failing, GPS signals scrambled. It's like... He pauses, realization beginning to dawn. It's like everything's been prepared to fail in specific ways. Shadow rises to full alert, his combat training evident in every movement. The dog's military experience included extensive operations in electronically denied environments. Now those skills are being demonstrated as Taylor's sophisticated equipment continues to degrade. Your operation had one fundamental flaw, Mason explains, watching Curtis's remaining tactical advantages dissolve. You assumed superior numbers and technology guaranteed success, never considered that someone might spend years preparing specifically for this type of confrontation. Through their surveillance network, they watch the Taylor brothers carefully. Planned operation face systematic dismantling. Professional contractors discovering their training means nothing against prepared defenses. Sophisticated equipment failing in precisely calculated ways. Tactical positions becoming death traps rather than advantages. Shadow's ears track new movement, more federal vehicles approaching, their engines mixing with the sound of local farmers bringing additional equipment. But there's something else. Something that suggests the Taylor brothers have one more desperate card to play. "Final warning," Curtis snarls, abandoning all pretense of legitimate business. "Call off whatever this is, or we burn everything. Every building, every field, every piece of equipment. Our men are in position. One word from me, and it all goes up." Mason's response is cut off by a new sound, multiple explosions from different points around his property. The Taylor brothers think they're demonstrating power. Instead, they're revealing exactly how thoroughly they've been outmaneuvered. Through the rain-soaked darkness, Shadow's network of trained dogs begins implementing their final response protocols. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with one trained military dog. They're about to discover they've engaged an entire coordinated canine tactical unit. The explosions illuminate the rain-soaked darkness, revealing more than the Taylor brothers intended. Through their surveillance network, Mason watches their incendiary devices trigger exactly where he and Shadow expected and prepared for. Each explosion site has been specifically modified to contain and redirect force, turning their attempted destruction into tactical advantages. "Quite the arsenal your men are carrying," Mason observes, watching Curtis's satisfaction turn to confusion as buildings fail to burn. Military-grade incendiaries, restricted weapons, equipment that requires special permits, and registered serial numbers. He pauses meaningfully. The kind of serial numbers federal agencies track very carefully. Shadow's ears follow specific sound patterns through the chaos, movement signatures that tell Mason exactly how their preparations are paying off. The explosions haven't just failed to destroy his property, they've activated hidden defensive systems throughout the farm, systems that Shadow's military training helped design for exactly this type of escalation. "Sir," Derek's voice carries professional concern as he studies the aftermath. "The charges, they're not penetrating. Every target point shows signs of specialized fire suppression, like they knew exactly where we'd strike." His tactical assessment falters. "And there's something else. The explosions have created some kind of pattern." Through positioned mirrors, Mason tracks multiple developments across his property. The failed explosions have released specific chemical compounds into the rain-soaked air. Compounds that Shadow's enhanced senses can use to track every member of Taylor's operation with military precision. "You're demolitions expert," Mason continues, noting how Curtis keeps checking his phone for updates that aren't coming. "Mr. Ramirez, isn't it? The one with the interesting history in South America." He watches realization spread across Curtis's face. Certain federal agencies have been very curious about his expertise with agricultural accidents. A new sound cuts through. The rain, the distinctive whine of high-end emergency equipment failing. But this isn't random mechanical failure. Each piece of Taylor's sophisticated gear is encountering specifically designed countermeasures, creating a tactical pattern that serves Shadow's coordinated response. All teams fall back to defensive positions, Curtis orders into his radio, trying to salvage his collapsing operation. But the rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make their movements trackable to Shadow's network of trained dogs. The very act of retreating is exposing them to carefully prepared response protocols. Sudden movement from the equipment barn draws their attention. Taylor's men have discovered another layer of Mason's security system, one that Shadow's military experience helped design. The seemingly simple farm machinery houses sophisticated countermeasures, each piece positioned to serve multiple tactical purposes. "Your men's body armor," Mason notes, watching Derek's tactical team bunch closer together. "Latest generation ceramic plates, designed to stop military-grade ammunition." He allows himself a small smile. Shame they're not designed for what they're about to face. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's operation encounter new complications. The failed explosions haven't just exposed their positions, they've activated specific terrain modifications throughout the property. Features that look natural but serve precise defensive purposes. "The Eagle Ridge team is completely dark," Wayne reports, his voice carrying barely controlled panic. "Vehicle electronics fried, communication equipment dead, and..." He hesitates, fear evident in his tone. "The dogs, they're herding us, moving like they've been trained for this." Shadow's posture shifts into a specific combat stance, another signal in their elaborate system. The dogs' military training included extensive experience with coordinated tactical response. Now those skills are being demonstrated in ways that are systematically dismantling Taylor's operation. "Should have done better research," Mason suggests, watching Curtis process multiple system failures, about military canine training, about how combat dogs learn to coordinate multiple units, about how they can train other dogs in tactical response. He glances meaningfully at the chaos unfolding across his property, about why certain federal agencies maintain special canine tactical units. A new series of explosions rocks the darkness, but these aren't from Taylor's men. Through positioned observation points, Mason watches their remaining equipment encounter precisely calculated power surges. Surges that render sophisticated tactical gear into useless electronics, creating patterns of failure that serve specific purposes in their defense plan. All teams switch to backup frequencies, Curtis orders desperately, but Shadow's ears track the futility of this command. Their backup communications are encountering the same specialized interference, creating gaps in their tactical coordination that Mason's preparations exploit with military precision. Your operation had another critical weakness, Mason explains. As multiple situations reach points of no return, you assumed that preparing a farm for tactical defense would be obvious. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years making every modification look completely natural. Through their surveillance network, they watch the Taylor brothers' organization face total tactical failure. They're professional. Contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against prepared defenses, their sophisticated equipment rendered useless by precisely calculated countermeasures. Their tactical positions become traps rather than advantages. Shadow rises to full combat stance, his military training evident in every muscle. Around the farm, years of preparation are about to demonstrate why some opponents are best left undisturbed. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with a simple farmer and his dog. They're about to learn the true meaning of coordinated tactical response. The darkness beyond Mason's porch erupts with new activity as Taylor's men discover another layer of their defense system. Through specialized mirrors, Mason watches their tactical teams encounter terrain features that seem natural during daylight, but serve very different purposes after dark. Each fence line, each equipment placement, each seemingly random arrangement of farm machinery now reveals its true tactical purpose. Interesting modifications to your night vision equipment, Mason observes, noting how Derek Taylor's team struggles with failing electronics. Chinese military prototypes, aren't they? The ones that disappeared from a secure facility last year. He watches Curtis's expression darken. Certain intelligence agencies have been very interested in their current location. Shadow's ears track complex movement patterns that tell Mason exactly how their preparations are paying off. The dog's military training included extensive experience with counter-surveillance operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated as Taylor's sophisticated equipment continues to encounter precisely calculated interference. Lost contact. With Eagle Ridge backup, Wayne reports, his voice carrying poorly masked fear. And the dogs, they're not just herding anymore. They're implementing some kind of tactical grid, moving like they've been trained in military formations. Through their surveillance network, Mason monitors multiple developments. The specialized compounds in the rain aren't just tracking movement. They're activating specific chemical markers throughout the property, markers that Shadow's enhanced senses can use to coordinate precise tactical responses. Your security consultant, Mason continues, watching Curtis attempt to reorganize his failing operation. Ms. Rodriguez from the Private Military Corporation, the one who helped design your tactical approach. He pauses meaningfully. She's been very helpful in understanding certain vulnerabilities in your standard operating procedures. A sudden burst of light from the northern perimeter draws everyone's attention, but this isn't random illumination. It's part of a carefully planned system designed to create specific tactical advantages. Before Taylor's men can adapt, the light shifts in patterns that leave them disoriented, while Shadow's network of trained dogs implements their next phase of response. All teams, switch to emergency protocols, Curtis orders into his failing radio. But the rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make their movements trackable to Shadow's enhanced senses. The very act of implementing emergency procedures is exposing them to carefully prepared countermeasures. Through positioned observation points, Mason watches Taylor's operation encounter new complications, their professional contractors discovering that terrain they scouted extensively during daylight has been subtly modified to serve defensive purposes after dark. Each feature of the farm reveals tactical purposes they never suspected. Your operational security had another flaw, Mason notes, watching Derek's team bunch closer together as more of their equipment fails. You assumed that preparing a farm for tactical defense would require obvious modifications, never considered that someone with military experience might spend years making every preparation look completely natural. Shadow's posture shifts into a specific combat stance, another signal in their elaborate communication system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with coordinated response protocols. Now, those skills are being demonstrated as local farm dogs implement tactical patterns that systematically dismantle Taylor's operation. "Sir," Wayne's voice carries barely controlled panic. "The backup generators aren't responding. Every piece of electronic equipment is failing in sequence. And the dogs, He hesitates, professional training cracking. They're not just coordinating, they're anticipating our movements, like they've been trained specifically for this." Mason allows himself a small smile, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. Shadow's military experience included specific protocols for training other dogs in tactical response. Now, those skills are being demonstrated in ways that are systematically dismantling Taylor's carefully planned operation. "Your tactical assessment missed something crucial," Mason explains, as multiple situations reach critical points across his property. "You saw a farmer's dog being friendly with local animals, never considered that a military canine might spend years training them in coordinated response protocols. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's remaining tactical advantages dissolve. Their sophisticated equipment encountered precisely calculated interference. Their professional contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against prepared defenses. Their tactical positions become traps rather than advantages. A new sound carries through the rain, the distinctive whine of specialized equipment, and failing catastrophically. But this isn't random mechanical failure. Each piece of Taylor's high-end gear is encountering specifically designed countermeasures, creating patterns of failure that serve Shadow's coordinated response. "Fall back to defensive positions," Curtis orders desperately, but Shadow's ears track the futility of this command. Their planned retreat routes are encountering carefully prepared obstacles, forcing them into positions that serve Mason's tactical purposes rather than their own. "Your investors," Mason continues, noting how Curtis keeps checking his phone for updates that aren't coming. "The ones moving money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the ones connecting certain land deals to international criminal organizations." He pauses deliberately. "Federal agencies have been very interested in those connections. Through positioned mirrors, they watch Taylor's operation face systematic dismantling. Their professional contractors encounter terrain features that seem to shift purpose in the darkness. Their sophisticated equipment failed in precisely calculated sequences. Their tactical positions become increasingly untenable as Shadow's network of trained dogs implements coordinated response protocols. "All teams, prepare for final contingency," Curtis snarls into his dead radio. But Mason's surveillance network shows him exactly how futile this command is. Every contingency they planned, every backup strategy they prepared, has been anticipated and countered through years of careful preparation. Shadow rises to full combat stance, his military training evident in every muscle. Around the farm, years of preparation are about to demonstrate why some opponents are best left undisturbed. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with a simple farmer and his dog. They're about to learn the true meaning of coordinated tactical response. Through the rain-soaked darkness, new movements emerge. Local farmers bring heavy equipment into precisely planned positions. Federal agents moving to seal escape routes that Taylor's men don't yet realize are compromised. Shadow's network of trained dogs implementing final response protocols that will systematically dismantle their remaining tactical options. "One last chance," Curtis declares, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. "Sign the papers now, or we burn everything." Every building, every field, every piece of equipment, our men are still in position. One word from me, and it all goes up. Mason's response is cut off by multiple explosions from different points around his property. But these aren't random acts of destruction. Each explosion site has been specifically prepared to contain and redirect force, turning their attempted destruction into tactical advantages that serve Shadow's coordinated response. Through their surveillance network, they watch the Taylor brothers' operation face total tactical failure. Their professional contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against prepared defenses. Their sophisticated equipment rendered useless by precisely calculated countermeasures. Their tactical positions become traps rather than advantages. Shadows. Ears track new movement. Federal vehicles approaching from multiple directions, their engines mixing with the sound of local farmers bringing additional equipment. But there's something else, something that suggests the Taylor brothers have one final desperate card to play. As the rain continues to fall, carrying compounds that make every movement trackable to Shadow's enhanced senses, Mason allows himself a moment of satisfaction. Years of preparation, of careful planning, of making every defensive measure appear completely natural, are about to pay off in ways the Taylor brothers never anticipated. They thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some opponents are best left undisturbed, why some threats require more than just force to overcome, and why some legends become legends for very good reasons. A sudden burst of static from Wayne's radio draws everyone's attention. Through their surveillance network, Mason watches specialized electronic countermeasures activate throughout his property. Each system failure isn't random. It's part of a carefully orchestrated pattern designed to create specific tactical advantages. You're communication specialist, Mason comments, noting how Curtis frantically checks multiple backup devices. Mr. Zhang, with his interesting background in Chinese military intelligence, the one operating under an assumed identity. He watches understanding. Dawn in Curtis's eyes. Federal agencies have been particularly interested in his recent activities. Shadow's ears track complex sound patterns that reveal exactly how their preparations are unfolding. The dog's military training included extensive experience with electronic warfare. Now those skills are being demonstrated as Taylor's sophisticated command and control systems encounter precisely calculated interference. "Sir," Derek reports, his professional demeanor cracking, "the backup communication grid is completely down. Every frequency we try gets scrambled in specific patterns, like..." He hesitates, realizing setting in, like someone knew exactly what frequencies we'd use and prepared countermeasures for each one. Through positioned mirrors, Mason monitors multiple situations developing across his property. The specialized compounds in the rain aren't just tracking movement. They're activating hidden sensors throughout the farm, sensors that Shadow's enhanced senses can use to coordinate precise tactical responses with his network of trained dogs. "Your equipment suppliers," Mason continues, watching Curtis attempt to reorganize his failing operation. "The ones connected to that private military corporation in Eastern Europe, the ones moving restricted military hardware through shell companies." He pauses meaningfully. "Interesting how their gear fails in very specific ways when exposed to certain chemical compounds. A new sound carries through the rain, the distinctive whine of high-end power generators activating. But these aren't Taylor's backup systems. They're part of Mason's carefully prepared infrastructure designed to power defensive measures that will systematically dismantle their remaining tactical advantages. All units, implement contingency protocol Delta, Curtis orders into his dead radio. But Shadow's ears track the futility of this command. Their contingency plans are encountering carefully prepared obstacles, forcing them into positions that serve Mason's tactical purposes rather than their own. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's operation face new complications. Their professional contractors discovered that terrain features they mapped extensively have been subtly modified to serve different purposes under specific conditions. Each aspect of the farm reveals tactical applications they never suspected. Your tactical analysis missed something fundamental, Mason notes, watching Derek's team bunch closer together as more of their equipment fails. You saw farm modifications that looked random. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years making every preparation appear completely natural while serving precise defensive purposes. Shadow's posture shifts into a specific combat stance, another signal in their elaborate communication system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with coordinated response protocols. Now those skills are being demonstrated as local farm dogs implement tactical patterns that systematically isolate and neutralize Taylor's teams. The dogs, Wayne's voice carries poorly masked fear. They're not just coordinating anymore, they're implementing some kind of tactical grid, moving like they've been trained in military-grade response patterns. His professional training cracks further, and our thermal imaging can't track them, like they know exactly how to avoid our detection systems. Mason allows himself a small smile, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. Shadow's military experience included specific protocols for training other dogs in tactical evasion and response. Now those skills are being demonstrated in ways that are systematically dismantling Taylor's carefully planned operation. Through positioned observation points, new movements emerge. Local farmers bring heavy equipment into precisely planned positions, guided by Shadow's network of trained dogs. Federal agents moving to seal escape routes that Taylor's men don't yet realize are compromised. Each piece of the trap closes with military precision. Your organization's structure had another critical weakness, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach points of no return. You assumed that a simple farmer couldn't possibly understand sophisticated tactical operations. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. The rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make every movement trackable to Shadow's enhanced senses. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's remaining tactical advantages dissolve. Their sophisticated equipment encountered precisely calculated interference. Their professional contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against prepared defenses. One final warning, Curtis snarls, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. Our investors don't accept failure. You have no idea what resources we can bring to bear, what connections we can leverage, what forces we can... His threat is cut off by a new sound, multiple federal helicopters approaching from different directions, their distinctive engine signatures telling Shadow exactly which agencies are responding. The dog's military training included extensive experience with coordinated law enforcement operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated as years of careful intelligence gathering pay off. Through the rain-soaked darkness, Mason's preparations continue to reveal their true purposes. Each aspect of the farm showed tactical applications that Taylor's men never suspected. Each system failure, each compromised position, each coordinated response serving precise purposes in their carefully planned defense. They thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some opponents require more than force to overcome, why some threats need to be understood before they can be neutralized, why some legends become legends through careful preparation rather than brute force. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from multiple directions cuts through the rain-soaked darkness. Curtis Taylor's expression shifts from desperate confidence to calculated assessment as he processes this new development. Through their surveillance network, Mason watches Taylor's men react with professional precision to this escalation. But their training assumes they're still in control of the tactical situation. "Interesting timing," Curtis comments, his voice carrying forced casualness. "Those wouldn't happen to be the same helicopters that had mechanical difficulties during our last 3 operations." His hand moves subtly, signaling his remaining teams to implement what they think is an uncompromised contingency plan. Shadow's ears track multiple sound signatures that reveal exactly how their preparations are about to pay off. The dog's military training included extensive experience with helicopter operations, both friendly and hostile. Now those skills prove crucial as Mason's defense network prepares to handle this new phase of the confrontation. "All units, activate. Countermeasures," Wayne orders into his backup radio. But the static-filled response tells Mason everything he needs to know. Their sophisticated anti-aircraft equipment is encountering the same precisely calculated interference that disabled their ground-based systems. Each piece of their carefully planned defense failed in specific sequences. Through position mirrors, Mason monitors new developments across his property. What Taylor's men don't realize is that the helicopter signatures they're hearing aren't all coming from actual aircraft. Some are part of an elaborate acoustic deception system. Another technology, Shadow's military experience helped adapt for farm defense. "Your anti-aircraft specialist," Mason observes, noting how Derek keeps checking sophisticated equipment that no legitimate security contractor would possess. "Captain Williams, formerly of Special Operations, the one who disappeared after that classified incident in Southeast Asia." He watches understanding dawn in Curtis's eyes. Certain agencies have been very interested in his current employment. A sudden burst of light from multiple directions illuminates the farm in stark relief. But this isn't random emergency lighting. Each source serves specific tactical purposes, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that Shadow's network of trained dogs uses to implement precise response protocols. "Primary countermeasures failing," Derek reports, his professional demeanor cracking as more of their sophisticated equipment encounters prepared obstacles. "Backup systems not responding. Every frequency we try gets scrambled in specific patterns." His tactical assessment falters. "It's like everything we prepared has been systematically neutralized." Through their surveillance network, Mason watches Taylor's operation face new complications. Their professional contractors, discovering that defensive positions they thought were secure, have been subtly modified to serve different purposes under specific conditions. Each aspect of the farm reveals tactical applications they never suspected. "Your tactical analysis missed something fundamental," Mason notes, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. "You saw routine maintenance and normal farm modifications. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years preparing every aspect of this property for this exact type of confrontation." Shadow's posture shifts into a specific combat stance, another signal in their elaborate communication system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with coordinated response to aerial operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated as the approaching helicopters integrate perfectly with their ground-based defense network. "The dogs," Wayne's voice carries poorly masked fear. "They're not just implementing tactical patterns anymore, they're coordinating with the air support, moving like they've been trained for joint operations." His professional training cracks further, and our thermal imaging still can't track them, like they know exactly how to exploit our surveillance blind spots. Mason allows himself a small smile, watching Curtis attempt to reorganize his failing operation. Shadow's military experience included specific protocols for integrating ground and air operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated in ways that are systematically dismantling Taylor's carefully planned contingencies. "Sir," another of Taylor's men reports urgently, "we've got multiple bogies approaching from the north, vehicles moving in tactical formations, but the signatures—" He hesitates, confusion evident. "They look like ordinary farm equipment, but they're moving with military precision." Through positioned observation points, Mason watches years of preparation pay off. Local farmers who've spent months training with Shadow, learning to integrate their equipment into tactical operations. Each machine modified to serve both agricultural and defensive purposes, now moving with coordination that speaks of extensive. In practice, your organization's structure had another critical weakness, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach points of no return. You assumed that local farmers couldn't possibly coordinate sophisticated tactical responses, never considered that they might spend years preparing for exactly this type of threat. The rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make every movement trackable to Shadow's enhanced senses. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's remaining tactical advantages dissolve. Their sophisticated equipment encountered precisely calculated interference. Their professional contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against prepared defenses. A new sound cuts through the chaos, the distinctive engine signatures of federal tactical vehicles, approaching from multiple directions. But what Taylor's men don't realize is that these aren't just any federal agents. They're specific units that Shadow's military experience helped coordinate with, agencies that have spent months building cases against international criminal organizations. "Last warning," Curtis declares, desperation finally cracking his professional facade. "Our investors have contingency plans you can't imagine, resources that make your little farm tricks look amateur. One call from me, and they'll bring forces that will make this look like a training exercise." Mason's response is cut off by multiple explosions from different points around his property. Taylor's men implement what they think is their ultimate contingency plan, but each explosion site has been specifically prepared, each detonation serving precise purposes in their carefully planned defense. Through the rain-soaked darkness, Shadow's network of trained dogs begins implementing their final response protocols. The Taylor brothers thought they were dealing with simple farm animals. They're about to discover they've engaged an entire coordinated canine tactical unit, trained by a military dog with extensive combat experience. "Sir," Wayne's voice carries a barely controlled panic, "the explosions, they're not having the intended effect. Every target point shows signs of specific preparation, like—" His tactical assessment fails completely. "Like they knew exactly where we'd strike and prepared each location accordingly." Shadow rises to full combat stance, his military training evident in every muscle. Around the farm, years of preparation are about to demonstrate why some opponents require more than force to overcome. The Taylor brothers thought superior numbers, and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some threats need to be understood before they can be neutralized. Through their surveillance network, they watch the final pieces fall into place. Federal agents moving to seal escape routes that Taylor's men don't yet realize are compromised. Local farmers bring heavy equipment into precisely planned positions. Shadow's network of trained dogs implementing coordinated response protocols that will systematically dismantle their remaining tactical options. The helicopters draw closer, their approach patterns revealing sophisticated tactical coordination. But Mason's attention is on Curtis Taylor's expression as final realization dawns. The understanding that they haven't just encountered prepared defense. They've walked into a trap years in the making, crafted by opponents whose capabilities they catastrophically underestimated. The investors' private security team? Curtis snaps into a satellite phone. Their last remaining communication. Link. Tell them to deploy now. Full tactical response. Use everything we've got. But Mason's surveillance network shows him exactly why this desperate command will fail. Shadow's military training included specific protocols for handling private military contractors. Now those skills are about to demonstrate why some threats require more than just mercenary force. Through positioned mirrors, new movements emerge along the farm's perimeter. Black-clad figures moving with professional precision, their gear suggesting serious private military training. But what they don't realize is that every approach route has been specifically prepared for this type of escalation. You really should research your contractors more carefully, Mason comments, watching Derek coordinate with the incoming teams, especially the ones with connections to certain international agencies, the ones whose loyalty might not be as absolute as you assumed. He pauses meaningfully, amazing what federal immunity deals can accomplish. Shadow's ears track multiple sound signatures that reveal exactly how their preparations continue to unfold. The dog's military experience included extensive operations against private military contractors. Now those skills prove crucial as Mason's defense network prepares to handle this new wave of professional opponents. "Sir," Wayne reports urgently, "the security team's communications are compromised. Their encrypted channels are experiencing specific interference patterns, and—" he hesitates, professional training failing. "Some of them appear to be implementing protocols we didn't authorize." Through their surveillance network, Mason watches Taylor's operation face systematic betrayal. Their private military contractors discover that federal immunity offers better prospects than criminal loyalty. Each team encounters prepared positions that suggest inside knowledge of their tactical procedures. Your operational security had another fundamental flaw, Mason notes, watching Curtis process this new layer of betrayal. You assumed money guaranteed loyalty. Never considered that some of your contractors might have been cooperating with federal agencies for months, providing specific details about your tactical procedures. A sudden series of explosions rocks the northern perimeter, but these aren't from Taylor's forces. Through carefully positioned observation points, Mason watches their private military. Contractors implement precise strikes against their own operation. Each explosion serves tactical purposes that systematically dismantle Taylor's remaining defensive positions. Primary security team is compromised, Derek reports, his professional demeanor completely shattered. They're not just failing to respond, they're actively working against us, using our own protocols, our own equipment, our own tactical procedures. His voice carries dawning horror, like they've been planning this defection for months. Shadow's posture shifts again, another signal in their elaborate communication system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with turning enemy assets. Now those skills are being demonstrated as Taylor's private security forces reveal their true loyalties, implementing tactical patterns that complement Mason's defense network. The thing about private military contractors, Mason explains, watching Curtis's remaining tactical advantages dissolve, is that they're professional. They understand odds, analyze risks, and calculate probabilities. He allows himself a small smile. And when federal agencies offer better deals than criminal organizations, they make professional decisions. Through the rain-soaked darkness, new tactical patterns emerge. Taylor's security forces coordinate seamlessly with federal agents, their inside knowledge of the criminal operation proving invaluable. Each team implemented precise strikes against positions they themselves helped establish. "Sir," Wayne's voice carries complete defeat. "Our own security teams are providing tactical data to the federal response units. Everything. Access codes, equipment specifications, operational procedures." His professional training collapses entirely. They've been documenting everything, building cases for months. Mason watches understanding dawn in Curtis Taylor's eyes. The realization that their operation hasn't just been compromised, it's been systematically documented by their own security forces. Each contractor gathers evidence, building federal cases, preparing for this exact moment. Your investor's private security team, Mason observes, as multiple situations reach final convergence. The ones with extensive military backgrounds. The ones whose loyalty you thought money guaranteed. He pauses deliberately. They've been particularly helpful in understanding your tactical procedures, in preparing specific countermeasures for each contingency you planned. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's operation face complete tactical collapse. Their private military contractors implement precise strikes against their own organization. Their sophisticated equipment is being turned against them by operators who know exactly how to exploit its vulnerabilities. Their tactical positions becoming death traps as inside knowledge reveals every weakness. The rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make every movement trackable to Shadow's enhanced senses. But now those compounds serve additional purposes, helping coordinate responses between federal agents, turned security forces, and Mason's network of trained dogs. Full withdrawal, Curtis orders desperately into his failing satellite phone. Get everyone out. Activate final contingency protocols. But Shadow's ears track the futility of this command. Their escape routes are already compromised, their contingency plans systematically neutralized by their own security forces. Through positioned observation points, Mason watches years of preparation reach final fruition. The Taylor brothers thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some opponents require more than force to overcome, why some threats need to be understood completely before they can be neutralized, why some legends become legends through careful preparation rather than brute strength. Through the rain-soaked darkness, Shadow moves with lethal precision toward his first designated target. His military training, honed through years of combat operations, shows in every calculated step. The dog's enhanced senses track multiple tactical situations unfolding across Mason's property, each movement part of a carefully orchestrated response. You might want to check on your demolitions team, Mason suggests calmly, watching Curtis struggle with this latest betrayal. The ones trying to access the grain silo's foundation. Through their surveillance network, he monitors Shadow's approach to the first major engagement. They're about to learn some interesting lessons about agricultural architecture. The sound of startled shouts carries from the silo's direction, followed by the distinctive noise of specialized equipment failing catastrophically. Shadow's ears track specific movement patterns that tell Mason exactly how their preparations are paying off. Each piece of Taylor's sophisticated demolition gear encountered precisely calculated countermeasures. "Sir," Wayne reports urgently, "Team 3 is compromised. Their shaped charges failed to penetrate the silo structure. Something about the material composition." His tactical assessment falters. "It's like the whole building was designed specifically to neutralize our equipment." Mason allows himself a small smile, watching Curtis process this new development. Shadow's military experience included extensive training in counter-demolition operations. Now those skills prove crucial as Mason's carefully prepared defenses systematically dismantle Taylor's remaining tactical capabilities. "Your demolitions expert, Mr. Ramirez," Mason comments, noting how Derek keeps checking failing equipment. "The one who specialized in making structural failures look like accidents. He's been particularly helpful in understanding certain vulnerabilities in your tactical approach." He pauses meaningfully. Federal engineers found his insights very valuable. Through positioned mirrors, they watched Taylor's operation encounter new complications. Their professional contractors discovered that what appeared to be simple farm structures have been specifically modified to counter sophisticated demolition attempts. Each building revealed defensive capabilities they never suspected. "All teams fall back to secondary positions," Curtis orders desperately, but Shadow's ears track the futility of this command. Their planned retreat routes are about to encounter The first phase of Mason's active countermeasures, turning tactical withdrawal into carefully controlled chaos. The distinctive crack of small arms fire splits the night, Taylor's men discovering that Shadow isn't just approaching their positions. The military dog has already maneuvered their demolition team into a carefully prepared trap, using their own tactical protocols against them. Interesting modifications to your weapons, Mason observes, watching Derek's team respond to the growing crisis. Custom suppressors, specialized ammunition, the kind of equipment that requires very specific permits. He allows himself another small smile. The ATF has been particularly interested in tracking those serial numbers. Through their surveillance network, new patterns emerge as Shadow implements the first phase of their response. Local farm dogs moving with military precision, herding Taylor's teams into predetermined positions. Each movement coordinated through training protocols that Mason's partner spent years perfecting. The dogs, Wayne's voice carries poorly masked fear. They're not just coordinating anymore. They're actively engaging our positions, moving like they've been trained in tactical combat operations. His professional training cracks further, and our thermal imaging still can't track them effectively. Mason watches understanding spread through Taylor's remaining teams. The realization that they haven't just lost tactical advantage, they're being systematically outmaneuvered by opponents whose capabilities they catastrophically underestimated. Your tactical assessment missed something fundamental, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach critical points. You saw farm dogs being friendly with local animals, never considered that a military canine might spend years training them in combat operations. He pauses deliberately. Shadow wasn't just playing with them, he was building a tactical response unit. Through the rain-soaked darkness, new sounds emerge. Taylor's demolition team encountered prepared obstacles throughout the property. Their sophisticated equipment failed in precisely calculated sequences. Their tactical positions become traps rather than advantages. "Sir," Derek reports urgently, Team 3 is completely pinned down. The dogs have them contained in some kind of prepared position, every escape route covered, every tactical option neutralized. His voice carries dawning horror. It's like they're implementing military-grade containment protocols. Shadow's posture shifts into another combat stance, a signal that tells Mason exactly how their counter-offensive continues to unfold. The dog's military training included extensive experience with tactical containment operations. Now those skills prove crucial as years of careful preparation systematically dismantle Taylor's remaining options. "Your operational security had another critical flaw," Mason notes, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. "You assumed that preparing farm dogs for tactical response would be obvious. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years building a covert canine unit disguised as simple pets." Through positioned observation points, they watch the first major phase of their counteroffensive unfold. Shadow's network of trained dogs implementing precise tactical patterns, each movement serving specific purposes in their carefully planned response. Team 4 reports multiple contacts, Wayne announces, his professional demeanor cracking completely. Farm dogs moving with military precision, implementing some kind of coordinated assault pattern. Our thermal imaging can't track them effectively through this rain. His tactical assessment fails entirely. It's like they're using the weather conditions as cover. Mason allows himself another small smile, watching Curtis attempt to reorganize his failing operation. Shadow's military experience included specific protocols for operating in adverse weather conditions. Now those skills are being demonstrated as the specialized compounds in the rain continue to degrade Taylor's sophisticated equipment. The thing about military dogs Mason explains, as multiple situations reach points of no return, is that they don't just learn combat tactics, they learn to train others, to coordinate responses, to implement sophisticated operational protocols. He pauses meaningfully. Shadow wasn't just protecting the farm, he was preparing an entire tactical response unit. Through their surveillance network, they watched Taylor's remaining tactical advantages dissolve. Their professional contractors discover that what appeared to be simple farm animals are actually implementing military-grade combat protocols. Their sophisticated equipment continues to fail as Shadow's trained units systematically dismantle their operation. "Final warning," Curtis declares, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. "Call off your dogs now, or we escalate this beyond anything you're prepared to handle. Our remaining teams still have enough firepower to turn this farm into a war zone." But Mason's attention is on Shadow's next signal, a specific posture shift that indicates their counter-offensive is about to enter its second phase. The Taylor brothers thought superior numbers and tactical training guaranteed their success. They're about to learn why some opponents require more than firepower to overcome, why some threats need to be understood completely before they can be neutralized, why some legends become legends through training others rather than acting alone. Through the intensifying rain, new tactical patterns emerge. Shadow's network of trained dogs implementing sophisticated containment protocols that Mason's partner spent years perfecting. Each movement, each position shift serves multiple purposes in the carefully planned counteroffensive. "Your tactical teams," Mason observes, watching Derek attempt to coordinate a response. "They're trained for urban operations, aren't they? Close quarters combat, building clearance, street-level engagements." He allows himself a small smile. Not much experience with terrain that's been specifically modified for canine tactical advantage. Shadow's ears track complex movement patterns that tell Mason exactly how their preparations continue to unfold. The dog's military training included extensive experience with terrain modification for tactical purposes. Now, those skills prove crucial as Taylor's professional contractors discover how thoroughly the farm's landscape has been prepared. "Sir," Wayne reports urgently, "Team 5 is encountering some kind of organized resistance in the north field. The dogs are using the crop rows for cover, implementing what looks like military-grade maneuver protocols." His voice carries a dawning realization. They're not just coordinating, they're executing practice tactical formations. Through their surveillance network, they watch Taylor's operation face systematic dismantling. Their professional contractors discovered that what appeared to be simple agricultural features serve specific combat purposes. Each aspect of the farm's layout reveals tactical applications they never suspected. "Interesting thing about military canine units," Mason continues, noting how Curtis keeps checking for backup that isn't coming. "They don't just learn individual combat tactics. They learn to coordinate multiple teams, to implement sophisticated battlefield control, to establish tactical dominance through synchronized operations." He pauses deliberately. Shadow wasn't just training other dogs, he was building an entire combat-ready unit. A sudden burst of activity from the equipment barn draws everyone's attention. Taylor's men discover another layer of their tactical response as Shadow's trained units begin implementing their next phase of operations. The seemingly random arrangement of farm machinery now reveals its true purpose in channeling enemy movement. "All teams, switch to emergency protocols," Curtis orders desperately. But Mason's surveillance network shows him exactly why this command will fail. Their emergency procedures are about to encounter countermeasures specifically designed to exploit their tactical doctrine. Through positioned mirrors, new patterns emerge across the battlefield. Shadow's network moving with military precision, each dog implementing specific aspects of their carefully planned response. What appears chaotic to Taylor's men actually follows precise tactical protocols developed through years of training. Team 6 is completely contained, Derek reports, his professional demeanor cracking further. The dogs have established some kind of perimeter control. Every time we try to maneuver, they adjust their positions perfectly. His tactical assessment fails completely. It's like they're reading our playbook, anticipating every move before we make it. Mason allows himself another small smile, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. Shadow's military experience included extensive training in enemy tactical doctrine. Now those skills are being demonstrated as Taylor's remaining teams find their every move countered with precise response protocols. Your operational planning had another critical flaw, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach points of no return. You assumed that farm dogs couldn't possibly understand sophisticated combat tactics, never considered that a military canine might spend years teaching them exactly how to counter professional operators. Through the rain-soaked darkness, new tactical patterns unfold. Shadow's trained units implement precise containment protocols, each movement serving specific purposes in their carefully planned response. What looks like simple herding behavior to untrained eyes actually follows military-grade tactical doctrine. Sir, Wayne's voice carries complete defeat. Our thermal imaging is showing organized movement throughout the property. The dogs are implementing some kind of coordinated battlefield control, moving like they've been drilling these patterns for months. His professional training collapses entirely. Every counter-move we try gets shut down before we can execute. Shadow's posture shifts again, another signal in their elaborate tactical system. The dog's military training included extensive experience with battlefield control operations. Now, those skills prove crucial as Mason's carefully prepared counter-offensive systematically dismantles Taylor's remaining tactical options. The thing about professional contractors, Mason observes, watching Curtis's remaining advantages dissolve, is that they're trained to handle human opponents. Their tactical doctrine, their response protocols, their battlefield procedures, all designed for dealing with people. He pauses meaningfully. They were never seriously prepared for engaging an organized canine tactical unit. Through their surveillance network, they watched Taylor's operation face complete tactical failure. Their professional contractors discover that superior numbers mean nothing against opponents who can exploit terrain features they never considered. Their sophisticated equipment continues to fail as Shadow's trained units systematically outmaneuver their every attempt at resistance. A burst of automatic weapons fire illuminates the rain-soaked darkness as Taylor's men abandon tactical restraint. For desperate violence, through their surveillance network, Mason watches Curtis's expression shift from controlled desperation to cold fury. The realization that their sophisticated operation has been systematically dismantled by farm dogs pushes them toward increasingly dangerous responses. That would be Mr. Chen's team deploying their specialized hardware, Mason observes calmly, noting how Derek maintains professional bearing despite mounting chaos. The ones with experimental targeting systems, quite expensive equipment for a simple land acquisition operation. He pauses deliberately. Certain defense contractors have been very interested in tracking those serial numbers. Shadow's ears follow specific sound patterns that tell Mason exactly how their preparations will counter this escalation. The dog's military training included extensive experience with counter-assault operations. Now those skills prove crucial as Mason's defense network prepares to handle this new phase of the confrontation. Sir, Wayne reports urgently, the targeting systems are malfunctioning. Something in this rain is interfering with their tracking capabilities. And the dogs' tactical assessment falters. They're using the weapon's discharge signatures against us, predicting firing positions from the muzzle flashes. Through positioned mirrors, Mason monitors multiple developments across his property. The specialized compounds in the rain aren't just degrading Taylor's equipment. They're creating specific patterns of interference that Shadow's enhanced senses can exploit for tactical advantage. Your weapons specialist, Mason continues, watching Curtis attempt to reorganize his failing operation. Lieutenant Parker from Special Operations, the one who helped source your experimental hardware. He allows himself a small smile. He's been particularly helpful in understanding certain vulnerabilities in your tactical systems. A sudden series of explosions rocks the northern perimeter, Taylor's men attempting to create escape routes through Mason's containment. But what they don't realize is that each detonation triggers specific countermeasures, turning their desperate attempts at breakthrough into carefully controlled chaos. All teams switch to infrared, Curtis orders into his backup radio, but Shadow's network of trained dogs is already implementing their next phase of response. Each animal moved with military precision, using the rain and darkness to systematically dismantle Taylor's remaining tactical options. Through their surveillance system, they watch new patterns emerge. The weapon fire creates brief moments of illumination, but each flash serves Shadow's tactical purposes rather than Taylor's. Every burst of light reveals precisely coordinated movements among the trained dog units. Team 2 is pinned down, Derek reports, his professional demeanor cracking further. The dogs are using our own fire patterns to predict movement. Every time we establish a firing position, they've already anticipated and countered it. His tactical assessment fails completely. It's like they've trained specifically for this type of engagement. Mason allows himself another small smile, watching Curtis process multiple system failures. Shadow's military experience included extensive training in counter-assault operations. Now those skills are being demonstrated as years of careful preparation, systematically neutralize Taylor's escalating violence. Your tactical doctrine had another critical flaw, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach points of no return. You assumed that superior firepower guaranteed tactical advantage. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years preparing specifically for this type of escalation. The rain continues to fall, each droplet carrying compounds that make Taylor's sophisticated targeting systems increasingly unreliable. Through their surveillance network, they watch his operation face new complications. Their professional contractors discovered that what appeared to be simple weather interference actually follows precise tactical patterns. "Sir," Wayne's voice, carries poorly masked fear. Thermal imaging is completely compromised. The dogs are implementing some kind of coordinated evasion protocol, moving between heat signatures in ways our systems can't track. His professional training cracks further, and our countermeasures seem to be making things worse. Shadow's posture shifts into another combat stance, a signal that tells Mason exactly how their counteroffensive continues to unfold. The dogs' military training included specific protocols for exploiting enemy weapon signatures. Now those skills prove crucial as Taylor's increasing firepower actually serves their tactical purposes. "Interesting choice of ammunition," Mason observes, watching Derek's team attempt to establish firing positions. Custom loads, specialized ballistics, the kind of rounds that leave very distinctive forensic signatures. He pauses meaningfully. The FBI's ballistics lab has been particularly interested in matching those signatures to other incidents. Through positioned observation points, they watch Taylor's operation face systematic neutralization. Their professional contractors discover that increased firepower actually makes them more vulnerable to Shadow's coordinated response. Each weapon signature provides tactical data that the trained dog network uses to predict and counter their movements. Team 5 reports multiple breaches, Derek announces, his tactical assessment failing completely. "The dogs are exploiting our firing patterns, using our own suppressing fire to mask their approach. Every defensive position we establish becomes a target." His voice carries dawning horror. They're not just avoiding our fire, they're using it against us. Mason watches understanding spread through Taylor's remaining teams. The realization that their escalation hasn't just failed, it's actively serving their opponent's tactical purposes. Each burst of automatic fire, each explosion, each attempt at breakthrough, making their situation increasingly untenable. Your combat training missed something fundamental, Mason explains, as multiple situations reach critical mass. You learn to use superior firepower to dominate battle space. Never considered that someone with military experience might spend years teaching others how to exploit that very dominance. Through the rain-soaked darkness, Shadow's network of trained dogs continues implementing precise tactical patterns. Each movement coordinated through protocols that Mason's partner spent years perfecting. What appears chaotic to Taylor's men actually follows carefully planned response procedures. "Final warning," Curtis declares, desperation driving him toward catastrophic escalation. "Call off your dogs now, or we will deploy everything. Every weapon, every explosive, every piece of hardware we've got. Turn this whole farm into a free fire zone." But Mason's attention is on Shadow's next signal, a specific posture shift that indicates their counteroffensive is about to enter its most decisive phase. The Taylor brothers thought superior firepower guaranteed tactical dominance. They're about to learn why some opponents require more than weapons to overcome, why some threats need to be understood completely before they can be neutralized, why some legends become legends through careful preparation rather than brute force. The night feels charged, every raindrop a potential turning point, every rustling wind a whisper of Shadow's next move. Mason watches, unfazed, as Curtis's desperation grows palpable. The unfolding scene on his surveillance screens is a symphony of precision, with every tactical flaw Taylor's team has made now a gaping wound in their defenses. Curtis's hand shakes as he grips the radio, his voice cracking with the weight of impending defeat. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he growls. But Mason can hear the truth behind the bluff, the realization that their sophisticated weaponry and tactics had underestimated something far more profound. "You're right," Mason replies calmly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't understand. Your plan was designed to deal with humans, not something that's been trained to think, adapt, and predict, things that are fundamentally different from your protocol." He pauses, letting the silence stretch between them. Shadow's network isn't just a collection of dogs. It's a system built on years of study, experience, and a deep understanding of the battlefield. This is a living, breathing counter-offensive designed to learn from and defeat the very best you've got. Wayne's voice breaks in again, hesitant and strained. "Sir, Curtis, they're using the farm's layout against us. Every area we thought was secure is now an operational zone. They're using our own mistakes against us." His words feel like a confession, the weight of failure pressing down on him. Mason shifts his gaze to the screens, where Shadow's tactical units continue to move like ghosts across the battlefield, exploiting terrain features that Taylor's contractors never thought to analyze for tactical advantage. What looked like ordinary ditches, mounds of earth, or crops planted in neat rows were, in fact, well-placed defenses, choke points, and ambush zones. Shadow's dog units didn't just learn tactics. They created a battlefield of their own, one, where every aspect of the environment was repurposed, from the most subtle, uneven ground to the erratic patterns of rain that soaked the land. This wasn't just the implementation of military doctrine. This was evolution in action, an adaptation to the unique set of adversaries in front of them. Taylor's final gambit comes with a desperate surge. With the sound of weapons charging and the flash of explosives lighting up the night, they push forward in a coordinated, violent attempt to break through Mason's perimeter. But it's too late. Shadow's network is already prepared, its movements a counterforce so precise that Taylor's final push feels like a slow-motion collapse. Every burst of gunfire, every explosion, is anticipated and countered with surgical precision. The dogs move in perfect synchrony, using terrain, sounds, and even the erratic firing of weapons to mask their approach, moving closer and closer. With each failed attempt to outmaneuver them, a final explosion rocks the northern fence, but Mason isn't watching the screen. He's watching Shadow, whose posture shifts again, signaling that the dog units are about to move into their final phase of the operation. The change in Shadow's stance tells Mason everything he needs to know. It's not just about containment anymore. It's about full decisive control. All units, Mason says, voice steady, prepare for the final phase. Complete containment. Curtis's voice crackles back over the radio, sounding raw. We're not done yet, Mason. We'll take everything. You've gotten more. Mason almost feels a twinge of sympathy. Almost. Curtis, this was never about firepower. Mason replies coolly, and it certainly wasn't about brute force. This is the point where preparation and understanding the battlefield, really understanding it, make all the difference. He lets the silence hang for a moment before adding, "You've underestimated everything from the terrain to the dogs to me." In that brief silence, the final phase of Mason's strategy unfolds. As the last of Taylor's forces push into the final contested zone, they walk straight into Shadow's carefully orchestrated trap. Dogs that have been trained not only to fight, but to force their adversaries into untenable positions, move with one goal in mind: total domination. Every tactic they've used against Taylor's teams, from the intercepting of their fire patterns to the use of terrain as traps, converges now in a perfectly coordinated strike. Curtis's voice comes back, tinged with the realization of impending defeat. "This is it then. You win." But Mason doesn't answer. He watches the farm unfold before him, each dog moving in sync with Shadow's commands, every inch of terrain, every angle calculated and exploited. As the last remnants of Taylor's forces fall into disarray, he feels a surge of quiet triumph. Mason's eyes meet Shadow's as the dog pauses, surveying the battlefield one last time. This wasn't just a victory over Taylor and his men. It was a testament to the power of preparation, understanding your opponent and knowing how to adapt. It wasn't about brute force or firepower. It was about using your strengths in ways others couldn't even fathom. In the midst of the chaos, there's an unspoken acknowledgement. Legends are not made through strength alone. They are forged through patience, precision, and the ability to see the battlefield before the battle even begins. And today, the legend of Shadow, the military canine who taught his handlers the art of war, was etched into the very ground where the last vestiges of Taylor's failed operation now lie in ruins. The rain falls harder now, the sound of droplets, pattering against the earth like the ticking of a clock winding down to its final seconds. As Taylor's forces falter, Mason watches them collapse, piece by piece. Curtis's voice over the radio is increasingly disjointed, a mix of confusion, disbelief, and quiet desperation. This isn't possible. Mason, still calm, watches Shadow, a silent, almost regal presence in the storm, survey the remains of the battlefield. The dog's instincts have guided the entire operation from the start, every calculated decision playing out with eerie precision. The dogs are still moving in formation, their military training making them more than just a pack of animals. They've become an unstoppable force, a reflection of the system Mason built with Shadow at its core. As the last of Taylor's forces realize the trap is complete, one final burst of gunfire shatters the night, a last futile attempt to salvage some shred of control. But it's useless. The dogs, already anticipating the move, adjust, flank, and neutralize. The gunfire only serves to guide them further into Taylor's ranks. What was once a coordinated attack turns into chaotic disarray, their lines completely shattered. Every angle of approach controlled by Shadow's network of trained canines. "Sir," Wayne's voice comes through, trembling with something between awe and fear. "Thermal imaging is finally completely compromised. They've turned our own systems against us. They're moving faster than we can process data. There's no way to track them." Mason remains silent, his eyes fixed on the screens, watching as Taylor's men, now broken, begin to realize the full extent of their miscalculation. Shadow's forces, not a single unit out of position, are everywhere now. They've already surrounded the contractors, their movements methodical, precise. Each dog moves as though it were part of a larger organism, one mind and body acting in perfect unison. Through the surveillance network, Mason can hear the soft rustling of the dogs moving through the wet grass, the silent growls of coordination. Taylor's men start to break and scatter in every direction, but it's no use. There's nowhere to run. Every possible escape route is already locked down by a group of dogs stationed perfectly, their instincts feeding off the environment. Each shift in movement a response to Taylor's forces, each pivot a countermeasure against their attempts to flee. The final vestiges of the battle are almost surreal in their stillness. Desperate men trying to fight back, but overwhelmed, outmaneuvered at every turn. Their firepower, once their greatest asset, is now just another tool of their own demise, guiding Shadow's train network closer, pushing them into more vulnerable positions. Curtis, voice barely a whisper now, can't mask his disbelief. "We had the advantage. We had superior numbers, superior firepower, better equipment. This wasn't supposed to happen. We're being outplayed by dogs." The weight of it finally presses down on him. "What kind of nightmare have we walked into?" Mason smiles, the edge of satisfaction creeping into his voice. "A nightmare you brought upon yourselves. You miscalculated the most basic element of war. You never bothered to understand your enemy." His gaze never shifts from the screens. Shadow wasn't just teaching these dogs tactics. He was teaching them to think, to understand the battlefield, adapt, and make it their own. You assumed you could overpower them, but that was always the wrong assumption. Wayne, struggling to maintain his composure, speaks again. "Sir, they're starting to pull back. We have some men in retreat." His voice falters. "But it's too late. They're too surrounded. I can't even begin to explain how they're coordinating this. Every time we try to establish a defense, they move again. They're moving like it's all one unit." "Because it is," Mason replies, his voice steady as ever. "You've seen what happens when you underestimate the power of coordination. The whole point of this operation, Wayne, was never to win the field with brute force. It was to understand your weaknesses. Every misstep you made, every moment of hesitation, Shadow's dogs exploited it. And now you're left with nothing. The last of Taylor's men begin to panic, their organized retreat devolving into disarray. It's like watching the final act of a tragedy, a symphony of failure, as their plans crumble in the face of tactical expertise that they could never have predicted. Mason feels a final sense of satisfaction as he watches them falter and fail. Each movement of the dogs, a reminder of the years of training, of lessons learned in battle and refined in shadowed corners of the world. Curtis, now completely undone, issues a final incoherent order to his men. "Fall back, pull out, we're done here!" But no one listens. The sound of their feet pounding through the mud and the rain is the last noise that escapes them as Shadow's forces close in. Their movements as smooth and inevitable as a predator's final strike. Mason's eyes flicker over to the screens one last time, catching Shadow's poised figure at the center of it all. The dog stands tall, calm amidst the chaos, eyes sharp and focused, a silent leader of this flawless operation. In that moment, Mason knows This is how legends are made, not with firepower, not with numbers, but with precision, preparation, and the ability to turn every element of the environment into a weapon. It was never about outgunning the enemy. It was about outthinking them, seeing the battlefield, not just for what it was, but for what it could become. And as the last of Taylor's forces are captured or driven into full retreat, Mason allows himself a brief, satisfied sigh. The rain continues to pour, the storm now passing, but the consequences of the night will linger long after the last drop falls. Taylor's team won't recover from this failure, and Mason's victory is sealed. No matter how much firepower, technology, or force they throw at the problem, they were never prepared for this. And now they never will be. As the storm continues to rage, its intensity mimicking the chaos that has now unfolded in the aftermath of Taylor's final desperate push, Mason leans back in his chair. The screens before him are a blur of shifting images, his surveillance network tracking the last of Taylor's men trying to flee, trying to regroup, but there's no escape. The dog units, once dispersed, are now closing in from all sides, cutting off every possible route of retreat. Mason watches, the rain splashing against the glass, as Shadow, the embodiment of years of meticulous preparation, gives the final signal. There's no chaos, no confusion, just the silent, calculated movement of each dog unit, each movement purposeful, a piece in the larger puzzle. They are shadows in the rain, a tactical force that has not just overwhelmed, but methodically dismantled Taylor's operation. "Sir," Wayne's voice comes through the radio again, this time almost reverential. "The perimeter's been fully secured. We have complete control of the site." Mason's fingers brush against the cold surface of his desk, the moment of finality almost surreal. "I've been expecting that," he replies calmly, though the satisfaction in his voice is unmistakable. "The plan worked exactly as we anticipated. Everything was set in motion long before Taylor's men even stepped foot on this land." Wayne hesitates, as if still processing the enormity of what has happened. It's hard to believe. We had every advantage, sir. The best technology, superior numbers, and yet—" His voice falters for a moment. "And yet it's like they were always one step ahead. How did they know? How did they know exactly what we would do?" Mason's gaze shifts toward the array of monitors tracking the final movements of Taylor's men, their resistance faltering with every passing second. He knows Wayne is grappling with a fundamental truth that had been hidden from their view until now. "They knew because they were trained to understand us," Mason begins, his voice quiet but filled with authority. Shadow's military experience wasn't just about combat. It was about understanding adversaries, human ones specifically. The dogs were trained not just to fight, but to study, adapt, and ultimately predict. Taylor's men didn't understand that they were walking into an environment that had already been tailored to exploit their every weakness. There's a brief pause before Wayne speaks again. "And you planned for this? For everything they'd throw at us?" Mason allows himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Not everything. But I didn't need to plan for everything. I just needed to understand who they were, their tactics, their psychology, what they would do when faced with the unexpected. And when you know how someone thinks, you can build a strategy that neutralizes their advantage before they even realize. They've lost." Wayne's voice is laden with awe. "But the dogs, how did they adapt so quickly? I thought we had them cornered multiple times." "It's not about cornering them, Wayne," Mason explains, leaning forward, his voice steady. "It's about understanding the terrain, the tools, and the weaknesses. What you call cornering, Shadow calls opportunity. Every time you thought you had a tactical advantage, they were already positioning for a counterstrike, adjusting before you even realized the danger. You were playing checkers while they were playing chess. They didn't just adapt, they anticipated. The final reports come in. Taylor's last resistance has evaporated into the rain-soaked darkness. The few remaining survivors of his team hold up in a small structure at the edge of the farm, trying to regroup. But it's already too late. The dog units have them completely surrounded, waiting for the inevitable surrender or capture. Mason leans back in his chair, satisfied but unmoved by the violence that has unfolded. Curtis will be the last to realize it. The sooner he accepts that his team was outmatched from the start, the better. Shadow has given us an unspoken lesson. Tonight, one that will echo for years. As the minutes tick by, the quiet of victory settles over the room. Mason's thoughts drift to Shadow, the dog that had become not just a weapon, but a symbol of the painstaking precision and planning that had led them to this moment. It wasn't about raw power. It wasn't about speed. It was about patience, understanding, and precision. Shadow's training wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about anticipating them before they even appeared. Outside, the storm begins to wane. The rain slows, the wind dies down, and the last remnants of Taylor's failed operation are corralled into a small, beaten section of the property. Mason gives the final order. Prepare the extraction. No more time wasted. Let's wrap this up. Wayne's voice comes through once more, tinged with uncertainty and disbelief, but the clarity of his words shows that he understands the finality of the moment. Understood, sir. All units are in position. Mason's eyes scan the screens one last time as Shadow's silhouette moves in the distance, the dog remaining ever vigilant, ensuring that every final move is calculated, every escape route sealed, and every remaining threat neutralized. The mission is over. Taylor's team has been defeated, not by force of arms, but by the very things they failed to account for: strategy, training, and the ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and anticipate. As the last of the intruders are rounded up and prepared for transport, Mason stands. He stretches, his body stiff from hours of monitoring the operation, but his mind is sharp, fully aware of the weight of this victory. This isn't just a victory, Mason murmurs to himself, the weight of the night's events settling in. This is a lesson in knowing your enemy, in preparing for the impossible. Shadow, the dog who had been the architect of this strategy, trots back into view, his posture alert, eyes scanning for any threat that might remain. But there is no more threat. Only the remnants of a failed operation, a shattered command, and a carefully executed plan. Mason turns toward the exit, his final glance lingering on Shadow. The dog looks up at him, silent but resolute. Mason nods. Good work, Shadow. This is just the beginning. And as the rain finally stops and the full scope of the night's victory settles over the landscape, Mason knows that while the battle may be won, the lessons learned here will continue to reverberate long into the future. This operation wasn't just a success, it was a statement. And in the world Mason inhabits, statements like this were not made lightly. The rain has finally ceased, leaving only the sound of droplets dripping from the trees and the distant hum of the remaining vehicles as they prepare to haul away the captured contractors. The eerie silence that follows feels almost surreal after the intensity of the past hours. It's as though the storm's fury has been mirrored in the chaos of Taylor's failed operation. And now, in its aftermath, the calm is almost too still, too perfect. Mason walks to the large windows of his operations room and looks out at the farm. The moon, finally breaking through the dissipating clouds, casts pale light over the land, illuminating the fields that had been turned into a battleground. Where once there were rows of crops, there now lies only evidence of a carefully orchestrated campaign. Footprints in the mud, remnants of the firefight, but no signs of the invaders remaining. Only a few figures in the distance, silhouetted against the moonlight, moving to secure the last few prisoners. "Sir," Wayne's voice breaks through the silence, but this time it's different. There's no hesitation, no uncertainty in his tone, just a kind of understanding. The last of the contractors are secured. Curtis's team is contained. We've got full control of the site. No more resistance. Mason nods slowly, his gaze still fixed on the landscape. I know, but this doesn't feel like the end. It feels like the beginning of something larger. Wayne pauses, unsure of how to respond. The entire operation, despite its success, feels almost too easy now. It wasn't supposed to play out like this, not with an enemy force this well-equipped, this trained, yet still so utterly outclassed by the precision of Shadow's dog units and Mason's long-term planning. Everything about the operation had been tailored to anticipate, to counteract, to dominate, not just on the battlefield, but in every psychological and tactical maneuver Taylor's men attempted. It was as if they had been set up from the start. To fail, I've been thinking, Mason continues, his voice calm and steady, though there's an edge to it now, a sharpness that cuts through the air. This isn't just about us winning here. It's about sending a message, a very clear message, to anyone who thinks they can underestimate us, or Shadow. Wayne still seems lost in thought, piecing together the various components of the operation that had just unfolded. A message to who, sir? Mason turns from the window, meeting Wayne's gaze with a cold clarity. To anyone who might come after us, or try to manipulate situations in ways they don't fully understand. We've just demonstrated how quickly the balance of power can shift when you don't fully grasp the force you're up against. Taylor's team came in, assuming they could steamroll a simple operation. They thought they could take this farm, use it for their own purposes. What they didn't realize is that they were never fighting a simple land acquisition operation. They were fighting something far more prepared, more strategic than they could ever imagine. Wayne shifts uncomfortably. You're talking about the long game, aren't you? Mason gives a short, dark chuckle, his expression unreadable. Always, the short-term victories are just steps in the process. But make no mistake, this was a lesson in patience, in subtlety, in the ability to create a network that can anticipate the unpredictable. The stillness in the room is thick, the weight of his words sinking in. We didn't just defeat them. We made sure their every move played into our hands. Taylor's team will never walk away from this and be able to explain what happened. They'll be too disoriented by their failure, too shaken, but that's just a small part of the plan. The real point is to make sure anyone who watches them fail understands exactly why they failed, because they never even considered what might be waiting for them on the other side. Mason stands, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. And now they've learned the most important lesson of all. If you don't fully understand your enemy, if you don't account for every possible variable, you lose. And that's something if people don't forget. He turns to leave the room, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway as he makes his way toward the main hall. Behind him, Wayne watches with a mixture of awe and concern, fully aware that the scope of Mason's operations extends far beyond tonight's skirmish. This was just a preview of something much larger, much more far-reaching. As Mason enters the main room, his eyes fall on the screen that displays the captured contractors and their defeated leader, Curtis. The faces of those who had once seemed so confident, so self-assured, are now filled with confusion and defeat. They're sitting, hands bound, surrounded by armed guards, their weapons and advanced equipment useless in the face of a system they had never anticipated. Shadow moves in the background, a silent and unshakable presence among the group of dogs that continue to circle the area. The canine units are vigilant, each one a living testament to the success of Mason's strategy. Their military-grade training, developed with painstaking care, is more than just an asset. It's a weapon in its own right. Mason watches the dogs move, their actions precise, instinctual, and deadly. He knows that their real strength lies in their ability to adapt, to operate as a network, as a collective force. They don't need to rely on brute force or firepower. They rely on coordination, on intelligence, on the ability to turn every advantage into a decisive moment. They can operate in the dark, in the rain, in any environment, against any adversary. And the Taylor operation, despite all its resources, was no match for them. A soft beep from his communication system pulls him from his thoughts, and Mason steps toward the console, his eyes flicking over the incoming report. It's the final debrief from his surveillance team confirming what he already knows. The Taylor operation is finished, their resources dismantled, and the key players are now in custody. Mason speaks into the mic, his voice calm, but with a quiet underlying power. Let's begin the cleanup. Ensure every detail is handled, no loose ends, and prepare for the next phase. There's a bigger picture in motion. Wayne's voice comes over the speaker in response, steady but with a note of anticipation. Understood. Sir, what's the next move? Mason looks at the screens again, watching as the remaining contractors are taken away, their heads bowed in defeat. Then he turns to Shadow, the dog standing at attention, awaiting his next command. The next move, Mason says, his voice unwavering, is making sure everyone else who is watching understands what happened here tonight. And then we prepare for the ones who will come next. He pauses for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over him. We've just shown them what happens when you mistake preparation for weakness. And with that, Mason walks out, his silhouette fading into the shadows, leaving only the echo of his calculated steps behind him, the dogs continuing their watch over the land they've protected. The game is far from over. In fact, it's only just begun. The morning after the storm reveals a landscape marked by the previous night's battle, a battlefield that, on the surface, appears tranquil, but Mason knows better. The birds are returning, the air still carries the dampness of rain-soaked earth, and the subtle hum of the farm's systems resumes its usual rhythm. Yet the silence is heavy. It's not the calm after a storm, but the quiet before the inevitable fallout from last night's operation. Mason steps outside, the cool air a sharp contrast to the heat that still lingers from the action. His boots crunch softly against the gravel as he approaches the barn where the prisoners have been secured. The guards are still in place, their postures alert but calm. Nobody dares to relax just yet. Shadow, ever watchful, is perched nearby, his eyes sharp, constantly scanning the horizon. The dogs, still in their positions, seem to breathe with a quiet purpose. They're not just animals, they're warriors in their own right, trained not just to follow commands, but to anticipate every movement, every intention, every strategy their enemies might devise. Their presence is a constant reminder of what was accomplished, what's still unfolding, and the far-reaching consequences of Taylor's failure. Mason looks over at Wayne, who's standing near a makeshift operations table set up in the open, his eyes scanning a series of reports. The man looks tired, worn by the intensity of the previous night, but his expression is steady, reflecting the quiet precision that has kept this operation running smoothly from the start. "How are the prisoners?" Mason asks, his voice low, but sharp, cutting through the quiet. Wayne's gaze lifts from the reports. "They're secure. Curtis and the others are cooperating mostly. I wouldn't say they've completely accepted the situation yet, but they're not putting up a fight. Our intel is solid, and their communications network has been shut down." "Good," Mason replies, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Make sure we extract everything useful from them. This isn't just about gaining control of this site. It's about sending a message. The contractors, their connections, the people behind this operation, all of it needs to be understood." He glances down at the reports Wayne handed him, the meticulous records detailing every move of the previous night. From the precise use of the terrain to the exact timing of their responses, it's all there. The Taylor brothers thought they were in control, But what they never realized was how carefully Mason had been planning every step of the way. Every weakness, every flaw in their strategy had been exploited. But that was only possible because Mason had spent years building this network, understanding his enemy on a level they could never imagine. Wayne nods. We've got a few leads already. Taylor's team had several backup contractors in place. Some of them are still out there. But what we're finding now is that the operation went far deeper than just this farm. There's talk of connections to larger players in the defense industry. Some shady corporations, even foreign entities looking to make a move on this land. Mason's jaw tightens. I figured as much. The attack wasn't just about land acquisition. It was about control of the property and what's underneath it. But whoever sent Taylor and his team didn't anticipate the level of preparation we had in place. He takes a slow breath, his eyes scanning the distance, as if he's already thinking several steps ahead. Prepare a more thorough assessment of the contractors and their connections. We'll need to get ahead of this before it turns into something bigger. This isn't just about stopping one group of mercenaries. It's about understanding the full scope of the threat. Shadow's ears flick at the mention of the word threat, his gaze shifting toward the tree line, his posture instinctively alert. Mason doesn't need to look to know the dog has sensed something. Even with all the technology at his disposal, Mason still trusts his canine network in a way that goes beyond logic. Shadow is more than just an animal trained for combat. He's a partner, a companion, and perhaps most crucially, a reminder of the unparalleled value of intuition. A sudden transmission crackles through the radio, cutting through the momentary. Silence. Sir, this is Bravo team. We've got something on the North Ridge. Unusual movement. Looks like we're not alone out here. Mason's hand instinctively reaches for his comms, his mind instantly switching gears from analysis to action. What kind of movement? There's a pause before the reply comes through. Uncertain, sir. A couple of vehicles have been spotted. Nothing we can confirm yet, but we're seeing more activity than expected. Could be residual units from the failed operation, but it's too soon to tell. Mason doesn't hesitate. His tone is decisive, his eyes sharp. Keep a tight hold on the perimeter. Do not engage unless provoked. I'll be there shortly with reinforcements. He turns to Wayne. I need you to stay here and oversee the prisoners. No one gets access to them without my say-so. If there's a second wave coming, we need to be ready. Wayne nods, his expression hardening. Understood. I'll keep the teams in position. Mason turns, his boots crunching across the gravel as he heads toward the command center. Shadow, ever the loyal sentinel, follows closely behind, his pace steady, unwavering. The dog knows what's coming before Mason even fully processes it. There's more to this than just Taylor's failure. There's a bigger game being played, and Mason can feel it in his bones. Whoever's behind this will be watching closely, learning from the chaos of last night. They reach the command center, a sleek, fortified structure hidden among the trees. Inside, technicians and operatives are already on high alert, scanning screens, adjusting coordinates, and communicating with other units stationed throughout the perimeter. We've identified the vehicles, one of the operatives announces as Mason enters. They're not from Taylor's team. They're using unmarked armored trucks, high-grade military vehicles. These guys are serious. We've also intercepted chatter. Whoever's out there isn't here for a land grab. They're looking for something specific. Mason's fingers move across the touch-screen interface, pulling up a map of the surrounding areas. The coordinates pinpoint the location of the vehicles, and the message becomes clear. This isn't just a random group trying to salvage something from the mess. They're after something hidden, something that's always been the true target. The farm's real assets. Alert all teams, Mason commands, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. We've got incoming. Prepare for containment and extraction. Whatever they're after, we're not letting them have it. He looks at Shadow, who's already in motion, sensing the shift in the air. There's no panic, no rush, only a calm determination as the dog moves to the door, waiting for Mason's signal. This moment, like every other, has been prepared for. Mason doesn't need to speak it aloud. Shadow knows exactly what to do. Mason grabs his jacket and heads toward the vehicle bay, his mind already moving through the steps of the operation, the calm before the storm has passed. Now, it's time to finish what was started. And this time, they won't just be fighting for control of the land. This time, they'll be fighting for the future of something far bigger. He steps into the vehicle, the engine roaring to life. The world around him sharpens. Every decision, every move, every detail is calculated. And this time, nothing will be left to chance. The game is shifting again, and Mason will make sure it's played on his terms. As the convoy rumbles toward the North Ridge, Mason's mind races, weaving through the possible scenarios that could unfold. Taylor's operation had been a loud, chaotic mess, one that he'd handled with calculated precision. But this new threat is different. It's quieter, more deliberate. Whoever's behind these vehicles has come for something far more valuable than land or resources. Mason's gut tells him they're after the real prize. The intelligence hidden deep within the property, something Mason had long known would eventually draw attention. The rain from the night before has begun to slow, but the mist still clings to the landscape, making it seem as though the entire world is holding its breath. Every branch, every rustling leaf seems amplified in the stillness, as though the farm itself is watching, waiting. Shadow, perched in the front of the vehicle, senses it too. His eyes dart back and forth, scanning the trees and fields with unnerving precision. The dog's instincts are sharp. He knows when something's off. Mason can feel the tension radiating from him. Shadow's alert posture is a constant reminder that this operation is far from over. The convoy slows as they approach a series of dense trees near the ridge. Mason gives a subtle signal, and the vehicles immediately begin to fan out, surrounding the perimeter. The ground here is soft, the earth still heavy from the rain, making it difficult to move quickly without leaving tracks. But Mason's team is prepared for this. They've trained for every possible terrain, every form of interference. Their movements are deliberate, calculated, a far cry from the chaos Taylor's men exhibited just hours ago. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.